We are going to go ahead and get started. As I said a minute ago, this is on the public education K-12 case, and nothing could be more timely than this if you've been paying attention to what's going on at the state and national levels. So we're delighted to hear from our teams about this. I'm going to ask first each of our coordinators to introduce themselves and the team members, either themselves or the coordinator to do it, however you prefer. So let's start with Gardner-Webb. Perry or Anna?
Good morning, Dr. Williams. Thank you so much for letting us be here. Thank you for all the hard work that the staff at NCICU has done to make this event possible. Dr. Anna Segas is my co-conspirator in our team, and we have 4 wonderful students: Noah Blanton, who is a senior psychology student, Nathaniel Qualls, who is a junior psychology major, Hudson Myers, who is a sophomore philosophy major, and Peyton Farley, who is a junior biblical studies major. And again, we're glad to be here this morning.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, from Pfeiffer, Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Taylor, one of the coordinators, and I'll let Carrie DeJacco, my co-coordinator, say hello. And I'll let the team introduce themselves.
I'm Carrie DeJacco at Pfeiffer.
Thank you, Carrie. Team members.
I'm Athena Maravellis.
Anna Cheek.
Okay, Anna Cheek, yes, okay. Drew?
Drew Brightman.
I'm Haley Zatolski.
Great, Haley, thank you. Okay, did we get our William P. student yet, Scott?
Yes, we did, we're all here.
All right, would you like to introduce yourself and have your team either introduced or introduce themselves?
Yep, I'm Scott McElreath from William Peace University, and I'll let my team introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, team.
I'm Samara Demery from William Peace University.
Thank you.
I'm Chase Elliott from William Peace University.
I'm Rachel Ashworth from William Peace University.
Rachel, thank you.
I'm Reed McKeown from William Peace University.
Great, thank you, Reed. Is that everyone? Okay, well, we're going to get right into this because we do want to have some time left, and we do have speakers after this, so we want to stay as much on time as possible. So I'm going to hold up the, oh my, even now, when we tried this yesterday, we were going to have clear bowls so you could see the pieces, and with the virtual background, the bowls were invisible, right? So, oh, here we go. Okay, if it's in front of me, you can see it. Okay, so our first presentation will be from Pfeiffer. There you are, Pfeiffer University. I'm going to get ready to start the timer. Is the team ready, Kevin or Carrie? Y'all ready? Okay, I'm going to start at 7 minutes. I'll do what I did last time, which is at the 1 minute mark, I'll post that in the chat, and that should pop up for you to see. All right, if you're ready, let's get started.
Thank you. For the Pfeiffer team, our stance is that it is ethical to place limitations on public schools. And in fact, those limitations should be disbanding public schools until at least 75% of the population has received immunity either via vaccine or through contracting the virus. This stance is based on utilitarianism, which is the idea of doing the most good for the most people. Although children's development could be hindered due to this disbanding of schools, the risk of exposing so many people to COVID-19 and the risk of so many fatalities or illnesses due to the spikes in COVID-19 exposures is too great to risk the fact of children going to school. To further our claims, we will have Athena talk in greater detail about what we believe, and then Haley and Athena will close.
Thank you, Drew. When we first started the pandemic, online schooling was one of the hardest things for people to adjust to, and then one of the hardest things for people to accept. But my mom is a preschool teacher, and all of this year she has managed to teach 23 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds online. Although it is not ideal, it is fully possible to teach kids online. And school districts are providing funding and computers and things like that for students to do so. So although it's not ideal that they're not in a in-person setting to be able to sit down and get the in-person education, we are not only still trying to enhance their skills in an academic setting, but we are also keeping them safe until we get to that 75%, which is so needed to help keep everyone healthy, not only just the students, but the students' families when they go home, the teachers, the administration staff, the nurses and custodians, everyone that works there. So by just trying and adapting to the online format, we can help at least sustain and improve a child's skill as doing so. To further explain, I'll pass it to Haley.
Thank you, Anna. So disbanding schools sounds like a really big, like scary idea, but my mom has an in-home daycare, so we always have kids running around our house, and she's been able to keep we haven't had like COVID issues with that, so we have like a little small like pod of people that we see every day. And one of the children that she watches, he's in first grade, and in Wake County, some of the public schools have allowed elementary schools to go in person. And this his brother ended up contracting COVID from the teacher. So you have the spread of COVID from faculty to the students. So that's not necessarily protecting all of the students' safety, and that puts other families at risk. Then you also have families that are unable to provide and watch over their children all day because their parents have to work. So you have parents dropping off their kids with having no choice where to take them. So there's obviously like pros and cons of disbanding school and going completely online, but we think that it provides the greatest amount of safety for both the faculty and the students by disbanding schools until there's that 75% through whether contraction or having the vaccination. And now I'm going to pass to Athena.
Thank you, Haley. So we believe it's the ethical responsibility of the school boards to take care of its staff and its children. We know not everyone has the best learning environment at home, but as Haley kind of touched on, we talked about using the school facility as kind of like a care facility so that kids who don't have parents at home because they have to go to work can be dropped off there. That way janitors still have jobs. We said that they could still run school buses to give meals to kids who don't have that at home. And teachers could have the opportunity to come watch kids at the care facility, but we think that they should keep the groups with different ages so that way parents don't feel as though their kids are getting ahead of other children. With online school from pre-K to college, the experience isn't great. We're not learning or developing the way that we should, but we feel it's the best and the safest way until 75% of the population can get vaccinated or has contracted COVID, which is obviously not ideal. That seems like the safest way, and it's the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. So with that, we yield the rest of our time. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much to our Pfeiffer team for those very thoughtful remarks. Our next team, bring this up. Okay. Next we will hear from William Peace University. Okay, so Scott, is your team ready?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Samara Demery, and I'm from William Peace University. My teammates are Chase, Rachel, and Reed. We follow a 6-question model for ethical decision-making, which was adopted by our university. Our model goes as follows. Starting with our question, what is the ethical question we are trying to make? Followed by relevant facts and information that helps answer the question. points of views and interests, values and principles, options, and lastly, our answer and explanation. Some relevant facts and information we found relevant to this case. Cases with students have increased due to schools opening. Some schools have allowed students to pick up hotspots, which allows them to connect to virtual learning from anywhere, whether that be at home, on the road, or out in public. Research shows that students do best with learning in person, and many students rely on meals provided by schools due to the lack of access to meals outside of school. Children also need human interaction during their primal years, which is K through 6, to help shape their personalities. And we also see that human interactions are good for their mental, physical, and emotional health. CDC had plans that recommended wearing masks, but it's hard to enforce that for younger students, especially those with disabilities. Many people take their masks off or pull it down to speak, which contributes to the spread of COVID-19. North Carolina, as we've seen, is opening schools back up in their three-phased approach, which Plan A is in person, Plan B allows children to attend school in person, but requires fewer children in the classroom. Plan C is all remote learning for those who choose. Now I will pass it to Chase, who will talk about our points of views as well as our values and principles.
So the various perspectives we have, first we have students who, they miss their friends and they need that socialization that comes with in-person school. We have parents who want their kids to be safe and they may not be able to work from home. So having that kid go to school kind of might help them. We also have school officials and teachers who want safe schools, but they also want their students to be getting a quality education. We have the governor and other elected officials. They want to implement a plan to keep kids and teachers safe. And then you have the rest of the community who want COVID numbers to go down. So some of them may be skeptical about children returning to in-person and potentially spreading the virus back to their neighborhoods and communities. For values, we value transparency, the concern for public health, because we know that kids tend to be asymptomatic and so they can easily spread the virus further. And we also value education. We know that the benefits of in-person education that impact lasts. So various options that we considered, we consider going virtual until further notice. With this, some students or parents may have underlying health conditions, so virtual option may help them keep those family members safe. We also have, on the flip side, we have students may become socially inept and struggle learning. That socialization is a big part of child development in school. So on the flip side, they're missing that. But COVID numbers could significantly drop. So for the benefit of health and safety for the community, they may stay virtual for the greater good. Another option we have is going all virtual or in person. And this would allow families to make the decision while potentially lowering class sizes, and this allows parents to choose which option. If they're able to stay home, they have that convenience, but if they can't, they can have them go in person. So now I'm going to pass it to Rachel for the option that we ended up choosing and our general principle.
So ultimately, our group decided that it's hard to choose what's best for each district on a state or a national level, and that it's best for school districts to allow families to determine what's going on in their communities and what they have access to. So instead of using ethical theory, we came up with a general principle. And our general principle says if a person or a group is in a situation where they can implement a policy that's been researched and vetted by a group and is good for the well-being of the majority of their constituents, education, and the greater good, then it is morally obligatory for them to implement the policy. So in essence, we believe it's morally obligatory for districts to allow families to decide on an individual basis whether their child will be all in person or all virtual, and provide resources for both of these groups. So one argument we've considered to support our general principle is the requirement by school boards for children to get vaccinated for illnesses like measles and mumps. These vaccines have been heavily researched, vetted as safe by medical communities, and they're good for the well-being of students because they prevent the spread of diseases throughout schools. And the vaccine requirement is also good for education because it allows students to be able to attend class more safely and more often. I'm going to pass it to Reed to discuss an objection to our general principle and conclude our.
Thank you, Rachel. So an objection that we anticipated to our principal is on the basis of accessibility. Some students might not have the financial means or the privilege to choose between attending online or in person, and will be forced to have one choice or the other. However, we still believe that this option maximizes the safety and the health of the majority of students. In conclusion, we have heard from Samara, who stated the case general facts, Chase, who gave points of view, options, and general values, Rachel, who gave our answer, and myself for an objection. We used a 6-step decision-making model to make the decision that if a person or group is in a situation where they can implement a policy that has been researched and vetted by a group and is good for the well-being of the majority of their constituents, education, and the greater good, then it is morally appropriate for them to implement this policy. Thank you.
And is that the end of the presentation from William Pete's?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much. And we had a little bit of difficulty, I think, hearing Reed, but I hope everyone was able to hear what she was saying. I think there was a little bit of low bandwidth there, but thank you for that. Okay, let's get back to my timer, and we'll be hearing from our final team on this topic from Gardner-Webb University. Are you ready, Perry and Anna, with your team?
I think so.
Okay, we're ready to go. Thank you. I'll start now.
We are from Gardner-Webb. Our motto is Pro Deo et Humanitate, for God and humanity. And because of this, we have decided to utilize humanitarian ethics while considering this case. Humanitarian ethics includes the principle of the value of life, the principle of goodness, the principle of justice and fairness, and the principle of truth-telling and honesty. If all of these are met and none of these are violated, then we can move forward with the principle of individual freedom. We have applied these to this case, and we have decided that the local school boards do have an ethical responsibility to provide public education in the midst of a state of emergency, in this case, a pandemic, and this includes in-person classes. Because we believe that failure to do so would be in violation of the value of life, the principle of goodness, and the principle of fairness. So I'm going to hand our discussion over to Hudson to let you guys know about some research.
So in doing research for this case, we wanted to compare the probable goods from reopening schools in person and compare that with the probable risks of reopening. The first thing we discovered is that from a study done in Wisconsin, there were 17 schools in which there were 191 cases of the coronavirus. However, only 20 of those cases were attributed to having been spread in schools. The second thing we discovered in our research is that schools are very important for detecting child abuse and child neglect, with 0.92% of school-aged children being abused or neglected in their homes, with schools reporting 1/5 of those to Child Protective Services. The next thing we considered is the potential risk of spreading the virus, and in our research we found that 0.84% of teachers are likely to contract the virus, and by the worst estimates for the highest age group likely, there would be about 3.8 out of 100,000 teachers would possibly die from the coronavirus, according to current fatality rates. This compares, however, to the 7 out of 100,000 students that are likely to die from child abuse or neglect in the range of K through 12. That would be likely to happen, or that will happen. Excuse me. And so we present that to show the difference between what would happen to teachers and students. And the final thing we discovered is that for children not within the range of school age, that there's a higher, significantly higher fatality rate at 26.7 out of 1,000 children ages 1 to 3 dying of either abuse or neglect. And so we just present these facts to show the tremendous good that schools do in providing health and safety for children. I'll now allow Noah to give an argument based on these facts.
Thank you, Hudson. So as we've already put forward, we believe and are arguing that it is indeed ethical to for the local school boards to open up the schools while strictly adhering and enforcing COVID-19 guidelines. And we look at this through the principle of the value of life, the principle of goodness, and the principle of justice and fairness. So firstly, when looking at the principle of the value of life, we see that the public school system offers a lot of resources that go to lengthen the physical health and life of students, such as nutritious meals, school lunches, and additionally, if we were to reopen schools in a gradual fashion while strictly adhering to COVID-19 guidelines, we would also see a mitigation of some of the adverse effects of social isolation, anxiety, stress-related mental health disorders such as acute stress disorder, as well as major depressive disorder, which can often manifest themselves in very physical ways in small children, such as headaches or stomach aches, things of that nature. So by reopening the schools, we have determined that it will do the most good to prolong a student's life. Secondly, when we look at the principle of goodness, we see that by a gradual reopening of the schools while adhering strictly to COVID-19 guidelines, we will promote good in that we will offer these students protection from maybe dangerous areas around their home, safety, shelter, and nourishment that they may not be getting enough of, or in some situations not at all, in their home environment. We also see that it causes the least amount of harm possible if those COVID-19 guidelines are being strictly enforced, as Hudson pointed out in one of the facts in that study. So, furthermore, we believe that reopening the schools will also take action to prevent harm from being done, in that it is giving these students a place where COVID-19 guidelines are being strictly enforced, which means that they are less likely to get COVID-19 through the spreading of other public places that they may be at, or possibly a home where someone in the family is watching over them, or a nursery, things like that. So lastly, looking at the principle of justice and fairness, we have determined that it will be more fair and more equal to allow students to be reintegrated into the public schools, because it will allow them to have access to resources such as Wi-Fi, technology, and just other educational tools that people in disadvantaged areas may not have access to. So when looking at these three principles, we have determined that it is indeed ethical to argue for the reopening of schools, because it supports all of these principles. So I will pass it on to Nathaniel now to give our conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. At Gardner-Webb, our motto is Pro Deo et Humanitate, and that means for God and for humanity. And it's for this reason that we chose to use the humanitarian ethics as the basis or groundworks for forming our arguments. As Noah was saying, the value of life principle will be upheld through the reintegration, because it will go to lessen the amount of malnourishment in children as well as abuse. The principle of goodness will be upheld, because it will reintegration will allow for a more adequate and equal distribution of learning resources as well as personal development for the students. And then finally, the principle of justice will be promoted, because reintegration will essentially equal the playing field for everyone involved.
I'm sorry, Nathaniel, but your time is up. I'm sorry about that. Didn't mean
it's okay. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you all for these very insightful comments that you've made, and we do have some extra time, so I couldn't let you, Nathaniel, continue, because we had each team to have 7 minutes, but we'll have some more time with 3 teams actually to discuss, so we hope all the teams will join into that. Okay, I do want to I'm going to move back to the gallery view here so I can see everybody. But we do want to thank our teams for their very thoughtful presentations and some excellent points and insight that they made. This is an issue that is being debated and actually has been debated, and a bill passed by the North Carolina General Assembly just in the last week. It is sitting on the governor's desk, and he is going to have to decide within 10 days whether to veto or to sign or to allow to become law without signing. So this clearly is a very, just as the vaccine one is, and we're in the midst of providing the vaccines, this is a very timely question as well, and we'll see what happens with that state law, because we were really focused here on the local boards of education, and when we started this, that was very much a local decision, and districts decided different things, as you know, and some did a combination and some changed mid-semester, and all the different ways that our districts were offering instruction. And then now the state is taking that overarching view, which could require everyone to provide in-person learning and take that state responsibility. So we'll see what happens, but stay tuned and keep your eye on the news, and you'll hear the results of that one, right? And a lot of questions that you all raised are questions that have been raised in those arguments in the legislature, and certainly at the local school board level and county commissioners as well. So, okay, I'm going to open it up. We have several judges in the room with us, and moderators and sponsors as well. So I'm going to ask first if they have any comments for our teams. I think we've got Mary Reese, Catherine Marker, Thomas Vanador, Vanita Danowitz, Jenny Corin, Myra Best, and Margaret St. Albans. If any of you, and if I think last time we had a couple people joining whose names I didn't have at that point, so any of you who would like to join in first, you get first dibs on comments or questions.
I have a couple comments, and I'll kick us off. I appreciated this particularly because I'm working from home in my work, and my own kids are young adults, so I don't have immediate experience. And so I heard your review of all the people who are affected in these different ways, and I appreciated that because it's complicated, and you did it concisely, and it was helpful. And I'm always amazed at how much I learn. Like I heard Gardner-Webb talk about the probable good and the probable risk, and I thought those are words I need. I need those terms as I think about these complicated ideas. So just wanted to express my appreciation for how thoughtfully and in such a structured way you try to discuss these really complicated issues.
Thank you, Catherine. Others? You're not gonna make me call on you, are you?
Hope it's Thomas. I'll speak up as well. So really thoughtful debate. I thought what was really excellent from the teams was really giving us multiple perspectives, particularly within the same conversation. So it's very helpful in this if you share that you have researched more than just an opinion. And so I think what I heard was much greater than opinion, but the whole probability of risk compared to others that Gardner-Webb threw out, I agree that definitely was good. But I heard that from the other schools as well, and really a basis for how you came to that. So really from my lens, I saw it from two perspectives. So from a business perspective, I heard it brought up that some parents aren't able to work from home. And in the business that I'm in, there are parents that aren't able to work from home. And so I really appreciated that perspective, that was considered. I also serve Boys and Girls Club. And so I thought about it from the lens of maybe those that don't have the same resources as others, and that was surfaced. So I think similar to the last conversation, you really did create the environment of an unthreatened conversation to allow all of us to consider both sides of the coin. And so I think that was really cool in what you guys shared.
Thank you, Thomas. Others who would like to make some comments, give some feedback to our teams?
Yeah,
Great,
I'll chime in. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I wanted just to quickly comment and say great job for bringing your thoughts and formulation to the table and just offering this discussion. I thought that some of the perspectives from Pfeiffer, especially about the school, I think the daycare, a personal story about a daycare and stuff like that, that actually ties personally to me because I have a little one in daycare, and I think about kind of how that affects my day-to-day and how it's influential to, you know, what many people are experiencing right now during this pandemic. So I thought that was really thoughtful personal testimony, bringing it, you know, to the table and just experiencing that. I also wanted to, I guess, maybe pose a question really. I know that there was a point where you had mentioned 75% wanting it to get to that point. Well, right now we know that vaccines for children are in the works but hasn't even been approved yet. So there could be an increased delay of learning. So, you know, that was another thought point that I had too, was how long or what time frame do we get to until we're like, it's too long? Do we default to in-person learning because the vaccines aren't going to be approved for children until the very end? You know, we're not giving them now. So that was also a thought frame that came to me. And then just overall, I really thought that everyone brought some really great topics, especially, you know, the 3 principles: the value of life, goodness, and justice and fairness. So thank you so much for sharing your information. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Vanita.
Yeah, this is Mary Reese again.
Thank you, Mary.
And first of all, I want to say everyone did a great job as well. Lots of perspectives, lots of things to think about. And again, this is really relevant. We're dealing with it every day. I have a grown son, but I have staff that have young children. So listening to both sides of this, it's really interesting who has daycare issues, who has two working parents and little kids that are distracting, the stress that my staff is going through, trying to manage work and kids at the same time. Very interesting topic. What I found really fascinating was the discussion around child abuse and other things that schools bring to the table other than just education and social interaction. I mean, they sort of get overlooked in these arguments you hear about whether we should go back to school or not, but the child abuse and the abuse, domestic abuse is on the increase, is really a significant issue right now, and schools do offer a buffer and a place that we identify that. So I thought that was a really interesting conversation. The other thing I will note is when we talk about statistics and the likelihood of a teacher getting ill and a student getting ill, and the fact that kids can't be vaccinated, I had like a gut reaction, and I think it's something that's really pins what how gray ethics, the whole topic of ethics is. How much do you rely on statistics? I mean, statistics are out there, but how much do they weigh those decisions? And there's an emotional piece of the decision as well as a scientific piece of the decision, and that's kind of what's playing out in the public right now. So I think the teams did a great job in bringing that to the forefront. So I want to say thank you and well done.
Great, thank you. Mary, others? And we have a clarification from Kevin, the Pfeiffer coordinator, clarifying that Pfeiffer intended the 75% as a marker for the whole country's population, not the school population. Just, I think that had come up a couple of times there. Any other judges, sponsors, or moderators who would like to give our team some feedback? Okay, well, we'll open it then to our teams. And we have a little more time than we did in the last round. And so happy to have you ask each other questions, talk about some points that you heard or didn't hear. Now don't be shy, because normally when we're in person, you get to ask each other a question, remember, as part of the scenario of the round. So those of you who've done this before should be used to this.
Hi, this is Drew from Pfeiffer. This is not quite a question, but just kind of a thought that came up. as certain teams were, we were talking, and as even we were discussing the topic, is a lot of these things that we're talking about this year, I feel like are tough to come up with a concrete, long-term plan, because there's so much changing in the science and so much changing in the world that that causes us to tweak plans. In the beginning, when we first got these topics, it was we thought COVID would probably be done by the end of the year, and so now we have to figure in how do we continue these plans going forth. And so I think that's a struggle when talking about these things in terms of ethics. At what point do we have to change our plan?
Well, I think you're exactly right, Drew, that there has been lots of change. I see Mark Benton in our Hollywood Squares here, and he's going to be one of our speakers at the end of our time today from the health perspective. And I can say from our work with all of our colleges and universities that the guidance and the information available has changed. It's just constantly changing because we are doing something, so we just didn't have any guidelines, right, to go by. And so we would have to be sending things out, and still are doing that to our colleges, as others are doing with their constituencies, to say, okay, here's where we are now. I know I told you last week that we were doing it this way. We're pivoting because we've got new information, and the department has new guidance, and CDC new guidance, and so we're changing. And that's been the case for vaccines as we've gone in through this, and that may change again. We just don't know yet. So yes, things are constantly changing, and something so new and different, and with so many unknowns, right? And now we have the new strains. Anybody else from a team or a coordinator who would like to weigh in on this? It doesn't have to be a question. It can certainly be a comment as well.
A comment. I think a lot of the debate here is around whether we can open the schools, assuming everyone can go along with all of the COVID guidelines, like social distancing of 6 feet apart, et cetera. But one thing that many times we don't consider is that in a lot of our school situations, that's simply not realistic. We don't have room on school buses, for example, for students to each be 6 feet apart from each other. There are many schools that don't have classrooms where students can fit 6 feet apart from each other. So I think in theory, a lot of these things would work very well if we could adhere to all of the recommended COVID guidelines. But the reality is that our school districts simply don't have the financial means available to them to make those COVID restrictions a reality in the classroom. But I actually had an argument with my sister about this the other day. My sister has 2 children, and she can't wait for them to get back to being in school full time. She lives in Kentucky, and their Board of Education is insisting that that all of the schools go back to being in person, and the teachers have a union, and they're refusing to go back until they get the buildings updated so that they can actually have more distancing between students and such. And there's a great debate going on there. And there's just a big disconnect between what would be great in theory and what the actual practical reality of the situation is.
Thank you, Carrie.
I have a question. I believe it was Pfeiffer that said that schools were providing the resources for students who cannot afford them, like laptops and stuff like that. Is that correct? Did Pfeiffer say that, or was it William Pease? Can anybody let me know?
We didn't say that they were providing laptops and such, because I come from an area where it's really rural and a lot of students can't provide or can't get that, and our school systems can't afford that. So that wasn't us.
Okay, well then, never mind if no one said that. I must have misheard.
But I will say your point about laptops and connectivity, and I'll be making this point when I talk a little bit about the ethical challenges to higher ed. It's not just K-12 with connectivity issues and going remote, and because across North Carolina, while We're very fortunate to have all of our K-12 schools connected to broadband, as well as our community colleges, UNC institutions, and all of our NCICU campuses have that connectivity. Our students are in a variety of positions, but so are K-12 students. And even though our college students may be able to have more independence to get somewhere that may have Wi-Fi, many of our K-12 students are not. And so whether it's a rural area where they don't have the connectivity, or it's an urban area where the family can't afford it, even though it's available, those are huge issues in being remote, just the connectivity. And then, of course, if you have the connectivity, do you have the laptop and the service to be able to do it? So yes, lots of questions there.
Would it be appropriate if I just made a comment about just all of these cases? As human beings, psychologically, we all, really want really straightforward and simple approaches to handle all this information and all of what's happening. But because of all of the factors involved, it's going to be very messy, and there's going to be harm put on several population groups, no matter what approach or pathway or what principles you take and use. And in sort of like adding on a little bit to what maybe we couldn't get to because of the because of the time for our conclusion, just talking about how there's no situation where both teachers and children will be protected, I guess in like a holistic way from the spread of COVID-19. And that's why the vaccine is so important, and that's why strictly following COVID-19 guidelines is really important. And kind of looking at all this, I've heard a lot of great points so far. I've heard, especially, I believe it was Pfeiffer, who offered all those different perspectives, I believe it was, or was that William Peace? I think, right? Okay, so I really, really like that, because usually when you're talking to someone, you don't get all of that, all those interconnected perceptions wrapped up into one argument. So I really like that. But just overall, so I'm not talking too much, I just really appreciate what y'all have done, and just for inviting us here. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. And thank you, Mary, saying that's what creates the ethical dilemma. That's right. And if we didn't have those dilemmas, we wouldn't be having the ethics bowl. If it were all straightforward and easily determined, right? Because that's the thing. We may be able to know what the legal thing to do is. We may be able to know what the available thing is to do. But the right thing in terms of ethics is a complicated matter. And that's why I think it's so interesting to hear the different points of view in all of these cases. Anyone else have a comment or question that they'd like to bring up? We will be going back in the main room at 12:13, and we'll have the countdown on that, but you can also see it on the screen here. And then we'll have just three fairly quick 5 minutes each perspectives. One we'll have from the governor's office, and then we'll hear from Mark, who's in our room. Thank you, Mark, for joining us on the health. And you've heard earlier today, NCDHHS or DHHS, it's the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, really overseeing all of the major health things. And if you've seen any of the press conferences, you certainly will hear the governor defer to the health and the science, and that's what we're following. And if you've followed some other states, it's been a little different, and even there are different perspectives on what that means, right? And then I'll just speak for a few minutes too about the higher education issues, because there may be some issues that you don't realize that we've all had to deal with more broadly, as well as on campus. So anything before we go? The other thing is that you can always, if leave, and if you need a little bit of a minute of break before the final part, you can leave and go back to the main room. But I'm also happy to have any other conversation that folks may want to add. Is there anyone else who would, either a team member or a sponsor or judge or moderator, who would like to say something about our discussion?
Hope, I don't fall into either group, but just wanted to.
You are a speaker, Mark. You can say whatever you want.
Thank you. And you all will hear me sort of share this in the remarks once we get back into the big room. But I wanted to just really commend you all for the great job you did. But you know, these ethical issues that we are currently grappling with this pandemic, there will always be folks who believe that we should make one decision versus another. But what I really appreciated, what these three colleges and universities brought up in this discussion, were the values that should sort of underpin or undergird your decision-making process. How important communication is, how important it is to be transparent and just sort of build in trust within that process. Because again, folks may disagree with the decision you make, but it is perhaps equally important the process you use to go through that decision-making. And just really, I wanted to give you all a shout out for lifting up the values that again, sort of were the foundation for the science and the data that you brought to your respective arguments.
Thanks so much, Mark. And I don't think you've seen one of our ethics bowls in person, but we'll invite you back next year to see it when I think a big value of this, as we talked earlier about, is that students really get to meet each other, to get to know each other from other schools, get to talk about all kinds of things outside the actual rounds. And so that's, I think, a real value of that. So Nathaniel, you've posted something here. Does a question like this one necessarily have an answer? Do you want to elaborate on what you mean?
Sure. I don't know if it does have an answer. There's plenty of answers to these types of questions, and you know, one answer might be better for the most people, but that also might be unethical. And there's, just like we've been saying back and forth, there's going to be problems no matter what. So is there really solutions to these kinds of things?
So I'll just comment that when you practice ethics and you apply ethics, it's not straightforward. I think it's so nuanced, and I think that's what you're getting at. And I love the fact that you're asking these questions, because the difference between legal and ethics is really values, and that's where it's value-based. They're value-based decisions, and where you're coming from and your perspectives are going to influence your values. And so you're going to do what's right, maybe not necessarily legal, but there's never a perfect answer, and that's what creates the dilemma. So these are great questions. And at the end of the day, when you're talking about public good, it's probably, you know, it's value-based, and it's going to have to be what's good for the greatest amount, and it will never be perfect for all. But so keep asking. I mean, keep asking. There is no perfect answer. There is no answer. I mean, really, we have to come to a decision, but a decision isn't always an answer.
Anyone else?
Dr. Williams, I'll make one more quick comment. Just that kind of sparked for me, just thinking about it from a business lens, is I think that values can vary potentially across different groups. And so I think anytime you bump into an ethical issue, it potentially drives change or thoughts for how you build for the future. So I think about diversity as an example of bringing different perspectives to the table, because what one values potentially is not valuable to the other based on their situation or circumstance. So I think that when big situations like this arise that are global and across lots of different groups, that it drives change for other things. So I don't know that there's always an answer to that particular question, but it does usually drive change as you experience trying to make a decision.
That's a very, very important point, Thomas. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, anything else? It looks like our breakout room is closing in 13 seconds, so we're heading back.